So my name's Gadd. And I am the beekeeper for Mass Audubon. I run a major beekeeping program at Drumlin Farm in Lincoln, Mass, and we've now expanded to a couple of other sanctuaries in the Metro West area. I've been keeping bees for probably too many years, but 16 years plus. We run a natural beekeeping program at Drumlin. Drumlin's farm is not organic, but it's sustainable and it's natural. He doesn't use any chemicals. I do not use any chemicals on my bees or our bees. I don't know how many people in here are already beekeepers. Beekeeping community is pretty split. It's half of us who do natural beekeeping and do not treat with chemicals, and the other half treats with chemicals. And we all treat, but I treat with natural products, some that we've kind of researched and developed and tested out at the farm. And a lot of people are using regular chemicals produced by some of these different manufacturers. And it's basically to deal with problems called Bureau mites, which are like a little tick. They do the same thing as ticks do. They attach themselves to the bees. They don't suck the blood, but they suck the fat. And they inject viruses. And if you don't control it, eventually it will kill your hive. So we've developed, again, tested and developed a number of natural products for doing that. I'm not really going to talk about that today, but if anybody's interested, you can email me at my email, which will be in the package I send you. And I'm glad to send you some handouts from some previous talks we've done about some of these natural products and natural approaches. Guess this doesn't want to work. Yeah. Who knows? The whole purpose of this is really to convince small-scale farmers, backyard gardeners to start beekeeping. One, to increase the number of bees out in the world, since the population is decreasing, but also for the small-scale farmers and even larger-scale organic farmers. It's a way to increase your output because you're almost guaranteeing more and better pollination of your crops. And also it creates an additional profit center of having honey to sell. And this is based on 6 or 7 or 8 years of experience out at Drumlin Farm, where we have found that over the 7 or 8 years, the output on the farm has increased by 20%, saying everything else is equal. Weather, and this year is the exception to the rule, unfortunately, because of the drought. Saying everything else is equal, output on the farm has increased by 20%, and the quality of what's produced has drastically increased. And there'll be an example in here to show that. So I'm going to give a lot of numbers and projections to show you the costs and what over time you should be able to increase your income. I always start with a little song to get you in the mood. The only thing I preface is this is not me singing. So.
Sing a song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Bees by the 1,000, they are working together, bringing nectar and pollen. Whatever the weather, I gotta keep the queen fed, laying 2 eggs a minute. For the next generation, the sky's the limit. No evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seed. We pop off the top tubes, let the brood, white loving and eggs mean that things are all good. We try to avoid the end with the stinger, but every now and then we still get stung on the finger, stung on the finger. Put some ice on that sting, cool down the burn, easing the suffering. Got varroa and brucema and no tracheal mites. It's a mess with all these pests, we might just give up the fight. But no disease will kill my bees, cause I take care of my hive. And through the winter into April, they will still be alive. Still be alive, my bees are alive. Hauling honey like a beastie, then in August we'll collect it and we'll have a great feast with lots of meat and pie and honeycomb and cookies too. And we'll still have enough to give honey to you, honey to you. Sing a song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Co-evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seeds.
So before I move on, I don't know how much people in here know about beekeeping and know about bees. This is the queen, and this mark on the queen is not natural. It's placed by whoever raised the queen. And it tells us 2 things. One, for observation hives, especially with kids, it makes really want to replace her every 2 years to keep her production steady. Some of us don't care. I let the hive replace her when she gets old enough and stops or reduces how much she's producing. When I say producing, it means laying eggs. They'll replace her and they will create a new queen. I prefer to let them do it, me do it. They've been doing it a lot longer, and they know a lot more than we do. Okay. Here we go again. Okay. So this is just a summary of what I'm going to talk about today. There's going to be one little video, a TED Talk video that really talks about nature's matchmakers and how honeybees are generalists, and a lot of the native bees and other pollinators are specialists. And without the 2, we would be in big trouble. It's a really quick, good piece. And then I'm going to talk about Drumlin Farm and our 7 years of experience and the implication for everybody else. And then I'm going to go through numbers about what it costs to start a beekeeping program and what the projections are for how much you could potentially bring in. And then talk about some other resources and other pollinators, okay? So, honeybees and all native bees and all pollinators are in.
Sorry, I wanted to make it bigger.
I'm going, wait a minute. Are really important to our crops. Again, 40% of the fruits and vegetables that we eat are totally dependent upon honeybees and all the native pollinators. Honeybees are the original immigrants to this country. They are not native to our country. So technically they are an invasive species, but we don't characterize them that way because there are a lot of invasive species that a lot of us try to get rid of because of the damage they do. They were brought over by the Pilgrims, so they've been here a long time. Native Americans used to call them the white man's fly until they realized how much positive things the honeybees did. There are over 30,000 native bees in this country. In this region, there are probably 5,000 to 6,000. The only thing I'll say about native bees and honeybees, native bees are much better pollinators than honeybees. They pollinate at a rate of somewhere between 80 and 90%, where honeybees pollinate at a rate of somewhere around 60 to 70%. Most native bees are specialists. So if I tell you there's a blueberry bee, you obviously can guess that they only pollinate blueberries. There is a type of bee called a squash bee. They only pollinate different types of squash, pumpkins, things like that. Whereas honeybees will pollinate everything. But again, the rate that they pollinate is less. The issue is that if you put them on a scale, honeybees, they're just a hell of a lot more because we're able to manage them, or we attempt to manage them is what I should say. And the numbers are much greater, okay? So this, again, this is, I really think this is a great piece and it really explains a lot.
Bees are very busy little matchmakers, wingmen in every sense of the word. You see, the bees' side of the whole birds and the bees business is to help plants find mates and reproduce. In their work as pollinators, honeybees are integral to the production of nearly 1/3 of the food that we eat. And these bees, dutifully helping lonely plants have sex, aren't alone, but rather are part of a very complex network of matchmaking creatures, critical for the pollination of natural ecosystems and crops. Plants in many natural ecosystems need help to have sex. Like many of us, they're too busy to find a relationship. They have too much photosynthesis to do, and they can't find the time to evolve feet and walk to a singles bar. Those places are called meat markets for a reason, because plants can't walk. So they need matchmaker pollinators to transport their pollen grains to flowers of the same plant species, and they pay these pollinators with food. Today, around 170,000 plant species receive pollination services from more than 200,000 pollinator species. Pollinators include many species of bees, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, beetles, even birds and bats, who together help pollinate many species of trees, shrubs, and other flowering plants. In return, flowering plants are an abundant and diverse food source for pollinators. For instance, fossil records suggest bees may have evolved from wasps that gave up hunting after they acquired a taste for nectar. Plant pollinator networks are everywhere. Ecologists record these networks in the field by observing which pollinators visit which plants or by analyzing the identity of pollen loads on their bodies. Networks registered in these ways contain from 20 to 800 species. These networks show a repeated structure or architecture. Pollinators interact with plants in a very heterogeneous way. Most plants are specialists. They have only one or a few matchmakers. Meanwhile, only a few generalist plants hire a diverse team of matchmakers, getting visits from almost all the pollinators of the network. The same occurs with pollinators. Most are specialists that feed on only a few plant species, while a few pollinators, including the honeybee usually, are generalists, busily feeding from and matchmaking for almost all the plant species in that ecosystem. What's interesting is that specialists and generalists across both plants and pollinators sort themselves out in a particular pattern. Most pollinator networks for which we have data are nested. In a nested network, specialists tend to interact more with generalists than with other specialists. This is because if you're a specialist plant and your only matchmaker also specializes on you as its only food source, you're each more vulnerable to extinction. So you're better off specializing on a generalist pollinator that has other sources of food to ensure its persistence in bad years. The same goes if you're a specialist pollinator. You're better off in the long run specializing on a generalist plant that gets pollinated by other species in times when you're not around to help. Finally, in addition to nestedness, the networks are usually modular. This means that the species in a network are compartmentalized into modules of plants and animals that interact more with each other than with species in other modules. Think of them like social cliques. A plant or pollinator dying off will affect the species in its module, but those effects will be less severe on the rest of the network. Why is all that important? Because plant pollinator network structure affects the stability of ecosystems. Heterogeneous distribution, nestedness, and modularity enable networks to better prevent and respond to extinctions. That's critical because nature is never static. Some species may not show up every year. Plants flower at different times. Pollinators mature on varying schedules. Generalist pollinators have to adapt their preferences depending on who's flowering when. So from one flowering season to the next, the participants and patterns of matchmaking can drastically change. With all those variables, you can understand the importance of generalist pollinators like bees to the stability of not only a crop harvest, but the entire network of plants and pollinators we see in nature and rely on for life. Next time you see a bee fly by, remember that it belongs to a complex network of matchmakers, critical to the love lives of plants all around you.
So I think that really gives you a lot of information about what all the pollinators really do and why they're so important to us. And I think anybody who's doing farming knows how pollinators are important to us and what happens if they disappear. So again, we started this program at Drumlin Farm about 7 years ago. Again, Drumlin is a sustainable farm, not organic. Why I don't really understand, but because everything he does is really on an organic basis. The only other things I'll tell you about the farm is he does not have an irrigation program for the farm. He is totally dependent upon rain. And when we have droughts like this, he has two big, sprayers, big truck on the back of a truck that he goes out and sprays the really critical crops. And 3 or 4 years ago, when we had the last drought, which was the worst ever, he had volunteer groups out there doing bucket brigades. And he and I've talked, and I've said, if climate change continues as we know it will, he really is going to need to change some of his ways he does things, because the farm is not going to survive in the long run. And this year is a perfect example, because one, his production is down, and two, the soil is really dry. But again, Drumlin is a working farm, and it's a sanctuary for wildlife animals that can no longer go back out in the wild. They raise chickens, goats, sheep, cows, lambs, and they process all of it, and pigs. The pigs are a funny story. They usually get 6 piglets in the spring, and when they're 250 pounds, anybody that does pig farming, they are shipped off to market. They usually have 6. 3 years ago, 4 of the pigs just marched right up on the truck. 2 of them refused. 3 years later, those 2 250-pound pigs are now 650 pounds and continue to refuse to get on the truck. So they're very stubborn, but some of us would say very smart.
Yeah.
So again, it's a working farm. They have a CSA. They do a farmer's market in Somerville, Mass. They provide a lot of fresh food to the Somerville school system. They have a farm stand at the farm, and they provide a lot of food to food programs in the region. And they produce a large amount. So this is just an aerial view of the farm. So you can see, again, it's approximately 250 acres. So some of it's sanctuary. This is really where most of the farm animals are. This is really the farm area. And again, they grow a substantial amount of stuff. And he does it with very few staff. They use it because it's Mass Audubon. He gets a lot of volunteers and a lot of interns. And as we all know, interns get paid almost nothing. So this is a map showing where our hives are and how they're distributed around the farm. A lot of beekeepers keep a lot of their hives together. I don't believe in keeping my hives together. Some of this more recent studies, one done by a guy named Tom Seeley at Cornell, has shown the closer that you keep your hives together, the more risk that they're going to transfer disease from one to the other. We spread them out all over the farm. And one, it's basically to ensure coverage on the whole farm. We do a lot of different types of hives. I don't just do Langstroth, the traditional frame hive that a lot of people do, most people do. We're doing 5 or 6 different types of hives. And partly it's to show people the different options for beekeeping. And some of it's for research that I've been working on. And some of it's for just demonstration purposes. Okay. So again, it's a working farm. We produce a lot of honey, which is a great fundraiser for Mass Audubon. And the farm produces a lot. We also run a bee school where we teach people how to keep bees. We now do an intermediate school for people who've been doing it for a while and want to learn new techniques or how to deal with more of the problems that beekeepers are starting to have. And this is across the road from the main farm where Mass Audubon's headquarters are. They loved what we were doing on the farm side. So they said, oh, can you put a number of hives over here? So we now have 4 hives on that side of the road. So again, we have a total of 16. We also have a major learning observation hive, which is 4 frames high, 2 frames deep. So there's 10 frames of bees in it. We created a pollinator room. And so we use it for educational purposes, and we keep that going all the time. Anybody who wants to see live bees today, I will be up at the fair later today. I have a smaller observation hive that's up in the kids program right now. That's full of bees. So if you want to see them. So the goals of our program was to increase the amount of output of the crops. It was also to create an additional profit center or fundraising center, however you want to look at it, for Drumlin and Mass Audubon. We wanted to increase the population of honeybees and native bees in the region. So we've been doing a lot of work with some of the native bees, trying to increase their populations. We work with mason bees. We're trying to work with bumblebees. I don't know how many people know that bumblebees are really an important pollinator. Tomatoes are not pollinated by honeybees because anybody who's raised tomatoes knows that the flower is very tight and a honeybee can't get its, what we call proboscis into it to open it up and suck up the nectar. Bumblebees are what we call buzz pollinators. They attach themselves to the flower and buzz, and it opens the flower up and pollinates. Now, some people who are raising tomatoes in greenhouses now have them hanging up and supported by a hoist that vibrates and shakes it to open up the flowers to get them to pollinate. I think it's the same thing with cucumbers. I know I'm familiar with tomatoes, but not as much with cucumbers. But honeybees will pollinate cucumbers. They can get into them, but the tomatoes, again, the tomato flower is very tight. We're also doing a lot of educational programs with adults and kids and the public, things like this I go around doing. And it's really to increase the awareness about pollinators and what we all can do to increase the number and to help the pollinators out there, which in eventually helps us. Because again, if we lose our pollinators, we're in deep trouble. And in parts of China where, I don't know how many people know that China is one of the largest producers of apples in the world. I never knew that, but in parts of China where, because of pollution and chemicals out there, they have lost most of their pollinators. And they have workers out in the field climbing the trees with little brushes. I don't know if the photo is in this package, pollinating flower to flower. Now, could you imagine that happening here? No. Again, we teach people how to keep bees, and we're performing a lot of research out at the farm on natural approaches. And to deal with some of the diseases and viruses that bees have. And I've kind of connected with a Harvard research group that was working with some of the pesticides and their effects. So I've been helping them, and they've been basically analyzing my bees for me, and because some of the stuff is too difficult for me to do. I don't have the equipment, so they will analyze my bees for me. There are a series of pictures throughout here of the farm. This is some of the fields earlier on in the season. This is one of the trailways. This is as he's getting ready a couple of years ago to plant. He's really good about letting stuff lay for a year to rejuvenate itself. So he will move things around. So here's, again, more pictures of the farm. Oops. Here's some of the crops starting to come in. And again, I already mentioned this. He does not water. He depends totally on natural water sources or rain, which, again, he's gotten away with for years. But if our summers continue like this one, he's not going to be able to survive, or it's not going to work. So we'll see. I've also tried to convince him to start doing no-till. And we've kind of run up against a brick wall with him on that. So we'll see. Yeah.
Do you bring your own water?
There are some water sources there are a couple of vernal pools and a little pond, but on the bees where the water isn't close by, I will provide extra water. Recently, I've been going around adding water to everybody. Just because it's so bad. The bees really need the water for their bodies and to cool the hives. They'll take the water and put it into the honeycomb in the hive and flap their wings and vaporize it and create their own kind of air conditioning.
They don't get angry that way.
No. So this type of weather, I don't really usually go near the hives. So I don't keep my smaller observation hive going. I pull frames out of one of the hives. They weren't very happy with me yesterday. It's just too hot to go in. So again, that's some more of the fields and things going on. The little house in the background is they raise chickens. I call them free range chickens. They move these portable chicken houses around the farm. They put up electric fences. They fertilize and they percolate the soil. Unfortunately, this summer, because of, I don't know how many of you know that there's a major epidemic of avian flu going on. All of the chickens have been locked up. All of the sanctuary birds that are usually in cages up on what we call the bird hill are all locked up. Because if one bird got infected, they would have to wipe out the whole grouping of chickens and birds. So they've been locked up all summer. Oh, I've been on for the egg production. They probably have 300 chickens. And they usually have 3 or 4 of these movable chicken houses that they move around the farm all the time, as they do with the goats and the sheep. The goats and the sheep have been moved around, but also the grass is kind of almost non-existent. So hopefully the avian flu epidemic will be gone soon. Well, this talks about the irrigation program that they don't have. Originally, before I got there, they had an older gentleman, so now I'm older, who had 2 hives out there and years ago used to teach him classes, and then he stopped as he got older. So the impact of the 2 hives wasn't that great. Here's some corn. They actually just started collecting their corn. First year was a good year of production on the farm. The weather cooperated fully. This is back in 2015. And it was the first year of the beekeeping program. We didn't have that many hives out there, but we started to see, and the farmers started to see some increase in pollination on the farm. And we really didn't capture that much honey that first year. We don't usually recommend you pull a lot of honey the first year of beekeeping. Generally, you don't get a lot of honey unless it's been an exceptional year. Again, we have different types of hives. This is actually called a wari hive, which is a natural approach to beekeeping based on a guy in France named Abbé Ware. I don't speak French, so I might not be pronouncing it correctly. Each box is the same size. It's just a bar. We let the bees build out their comb themselves. And I don't know if there's a picture in the front. There's some more of the chicken houses. There are windows on the fronts of these boxes that the kids can open and look and see inside and see what the bees are doing. Second year of the program, we didn't have a lot of rain. 2016, which might have been the year of the drought. Yeah, it was. Should read my own writing. Though we did pull about 300 pounds of honey. A lot of beekeepers will pull honey in the early summer after the spring, what I call the spring rush. I never pull my honey early in the summer. I always wait until the end of the summer. That year that people pull their honey, generally like they always do in the early summer, they had nothing in the fall, in the late summer because of the drought, because all of the nectar dried up. And then they had to feed their bees sugar water to ensure that they might have enough food to get through the winter. Again, I always wait until late in the summer to pull my honey. I just don't like taking that risk. Because of climate change, we used to tell people when I teach that they should keep 60 to 80 pounds of honey in the hive for the bees. I now tell people to keep 80 to 100 pounds. Winters are warmer. The last 2 Christmases, I don't know how many people remember, was 65 degrees, which is kind of crazy. The warmer it is, the more food the bees eat. The colder it is, the less they eat. It's kind of reverse of some of us. The colder I am, the more I eat. The warmer I am, the less I eat. So with these warmer winters, they're eating more. So you have to leave more in the hive for them or else they're going to starve. The other problem with the weather change is that because our temperatures have been so much higher in the winter, the bees get tricked. They think it's spring. They engorge themselves with honey, which is fueling up, and they start flying out looking for flowers. And they never make it back because obviously there's nothing out there. So some of us are working on management techniques to try and deal with that issue of how to prevent them from going out. Though, if it continues to be warm winters, maybe some flowers will start to bloom, who knows? Again, it was a poor year. This is more pictures of the farm, more of the chicken houses. Third year, 2017 was a super good year. The farm did really well. We started to see this 20% increase in the poundage that he was producing. I've been trying to get him on. I'm not a very technical, computer-oriented person, but when it comes to some things, it does make it easier. We've been trying to get him on a computer program to track the poundage that he's producing from year to year to see what the increases are. He's very stubborn when it comes to that. We have not been able to get him to do that. And the way we've been coming up with our numbers is looking at what money it's brought in and how much that has increased over the years as a one way of showing that the beekeeping program has really increased the output on the farm. And again, it's averaging at 20%. And we brought in a lot of honey, over 800 pounds. This is a Wari hive, the one I talked about that has the windows. This is inside the hive. You can look in the windows. This is all capped honey that the bees have brought in. So you can imagine how excited the kids get when they see this. I mean, I get excited. So I know they get excited. So this really is capped already, ready to capture. Tomatoes growing. Fourth year was another good year. Things continued to increase on the farm. The output continued to show higher levels. Though we did start to leave more honey in the hives that year because of the winters. Cabbage. I mean, again, he grows a real diversity of crops, and they grow a diversity of flowers. And timing wise, there's always something blooming through the whole season, which is great for the bees. One of the problems with the big commercial farms, and hopefully no one in here is a big commercial farm, that people call it monocropping. I call it clear-cut farming. They go in and clear everything out, every weed, every flower, everything, and they just plant their crop. And then they use a lot of chemicals. Well, the bees don't, as we don't like just eating one thing all the time, neither do the bees. And so the diversity of their food source drops drastically. Plus they're ingesting all the chemicals that are being used, which really seriously is affecting the bees. Everybody's heard about colony collapse. One of the major studies that was done basically showed that the big commercial beekeepers who moved their hives around the country to these big monocrops basically were getting dementia. So they would fly out from their bee farms, in effect, when they were stored for the off season, and they couldn't find their way back. Just like dementia for us, they got lost and were never made it back. So they gotta stop using all these chemicals. Fifth year continued on the same level, and again we produced a lot of honey, though we're leaving more honey in the hives to get through the winter. Again, because of climate change, because the winter temperatures, if you look at the statistics, have increased every year. I actually would prefer it to be super cold and a lot of snow. The bees do better when there's a lot of snow in the winter up here. but we just haven't had that in a number of years. This is one of our test hives that we were testing some of our natural techniques for dealing with some of the disease problems. You can see all the what do you call it? Queen Anne's lace. God, I can't believe I forgot that. Queen Anne's lace, I don't know how many people know, is an invasive species. In the year of the drought, Queen Anne's lace does really well when it's dry. But when the wind blows, the seeds get thrown over everywhere. And because of the drought, they had asked the grounds crew to clear out all the Queen Anne's lace. And this is a field behind a couple of my test hives. And I said, oh, don't do the skinny field behind the test hives. I said, because the bees love the Queen Anne's lace. And of course, by the time I got out to the field, the guys had already wiped it all out. Again, more of the farm. Sixth year continued. Again, we kept increased, the production continued to be in an increase of 20%. Their sunflower crop, bees love sunflowers. This is a typical Langstroth hive, the typical hive that most beekeepers use and most people are familiar with. And the seventh year, we were slightly lower because of all the rain if everybody remembers, we had a lot of rain last year, which everybody wishes we had now. And so the production dropped a little bit because of the rain. This is called the Slovenian hive. 1 in 3 families in Slovenia are beekeepers. And in Slovenia, they put a number of these hives in a garden shed and they'll work them from inside. There are no boxes to lift. It looks like the yellow is the hive itself, and it looks like a kitchen cabinet. So there's nothing to lift. So if you're older and want to do beekeeping, this is a perfect way to do it, or what we call a horizontal hive. So the implications for everybody is that, again, beekeeping programs increase production on the farm. At Drumlin, it was 20%. We do have a lot of hives. On a smaller farm, all it takes is one. I would project 1 to 5 hives, depending upon your size. And I guarantee you, if everything else is equal, because I can't predict the weather, your output will drastically increase. Period. And you will have an additional profit center of honey sales that you can sell, no less than any other of the products of the hive that you decide to capture. Oops. And it helps to encourage increasing of the native bee population, because when the honeybees are out there, the native bees numbers start to increase naturally. And more of the public is demanding more organic and sustainable food sources. These are my 2 test hives that I was experimenting with on the natural approaches. We now use those approaches on all the hives at the farm and have had a lot of luck. Losses in New England for beekeepers in the last number of years have been fairly high. Last year, they were as high as 60% of hives were lost. We've averaged 20 to 30% losses.
What's the losses from?
Losses from viromites, chemical problems, spraying problems, state sprays for mosquitoes. And this year, because of the weather, that spraying has drastically increased. If it used to be you had to notify your local public health department about that you didn't want to have your property sprayed by a certified letter. Luckily, there's a new person in MDAR, and for those who don't know, is Mass Department of Agriculture, has a department specifically related to the honeybees and pollinators. They now have a process where all you have to do is go online and fill out a form that you don't want to be sprayed. Now, does that guarantee your property won't be sprayed? No. But Generally, it does. You can also get on an email list to be notified when there will be spraying in your region or your area. They generally are spraying at dusk. And so there are certain things you can do to protect your hives with the sprays they're using. That's fine for public spray. There are private people who are supposedly licensed doing spraying in people's yards, not fully following the regs. And there have been a lot of incidents of, in effect, bee kills from pesticide poison and insecticide poisoning, which the state is trying to really push and change how that happens. But again, the biggest threat to honeybees are the insecticides, fungicides, and pesticides that farmers use on their crops and gardeners use in their gardens. Veromites, this insect that attacks the bees, which when I first started, there was none 16 years ago. And that problem has geometrically increased over the years. And a lot of the chemicals a lot of beekeepers use are like a lot of the antibiotics we use. Over time, they don't do anything. And some of our natural approaches so far, we've had a lot of luck with and continue to be positive. So, yep.
What are some of those?
Mushrooms. I brew a mushroom tea, a specific type of mushroom tea that I feed the bees. These mushroom teams have shown to wipe out viruses, viral loads in the bees. I use rhubarb leaves. Rhubarb leaves are a throwaway. Rhubarb leaves are poisonous to us. So the farmers will cut them off and throw them away, or at the farmer's market, they cut them off, throw them away. Rhubarb leaves have somewhere between 5 and 10% natural sources of oxalic acid. And a lot of beekeepers will use a powdered form of oxalic acid that they put into they put on a metal plate that's tied to a battery, and they shove it in their hive and they vaporize it. I don't think the results are that great. Plus, oxalic acid in a vaporized form is extremely dangerous to us. If you breathe it in, you will badly damage your lungs. So you need to use a respirator. I mean, we've all gotten used to these, I shouldn't call them stupid, but because they work, but we've all gotten used to these masks. These masks don't work for using oxalic acid. You have to use a heavy duty respirator. I'm too much of a klutz. I wouldn't do it. You take the rhubarb leaves and I lay them on top of the frames in the hive and I close the hive. Honeybees are so clean and sanitary that they chew through those leaves within a day or more, remove it from the hive, but when they chew through it, it releases the oxalic acid and knocks the mites off.
Wow.
So the combination of the two, now been doing it for 5 years, I think, have really shown that we have basically almost gotten rid of our mite problems.
In the
No.
mushroom tea, you put that in a feeder, like how do you?
When you usually start your hive in the beginning of the season, because there's not much out there, people feed their bees sugar water. I keep honey from each hive all the time, and I'll feed them honey water because I don't particularly like using sugar water because of the
Yeah.
pH level. Commercial beekeepers use corn syrup. And I'll mix that in with it. I also don't use, a lot of beekeepers use smoke when they go into their hives. I don't like to use smoke because smoke, when you smoke your hive, the bees think, oh my God, there's a fire in the woods. We have to pack up and leave. So they engorge themselves with honey to get ready to leave because they know they're going to need a lot of energy to create new housekeeping somewhere. And so they let the beekeeper do what they want. Because they're ignoring him or her and focus on getting ready to leave. I don't like exciting them like that. And then when you stop smoking, after you've done what you need to do, they say, oh, the fire rangers put the fire out. We don't have to go anywhere. They've already engorged their honey. So they decrease their supply, which they have to build back up. So I listen to my hives with a stethoscope. And if it's a nice calm day, I just go in with a misting bottle filled with honey water and this tea mixture. So again, I spray them, I spray the walls of the hive. They're so sanitary, they clean everything. And they're ingesting this bee tea, as I call it, or mushroom tea, and getting it into their system, which helps wipe out their guts. And then in weather like this, when I'm adding extra water, either directly on the hive or next to the hive, I mix in the mushroom tea mixture. So any chance I get to give them the mushroom tea, I give it to them.
What kind of mushroom?
I use reishi or chaga. There's some research on some others. There's a guy named Paul Stamets, who is the godfather of mushrooms. Learned a lot about mushrooms in the last number of years. And originally I got into this.
What's his last name?
Stamets. He's written a number of books. He has a company called Fungi something. He makes a lot of products. He makes a lot of medical related products. I started buying extracts, which were really expensive. One of the things you'll find is beekeepers tend to be cheap, don't want to spend a lot of money. Or I'm cheap, but I don't want to spend a lot of money. So I was buying these little bottles for $16. I then found I could buy powdered form of the reishi. And then at one of the NOFA conferences, I met a guy who grows mushrooms out here and started buying dried mushrooms from him, and then bought plugs, and now I grow my own mushroom.
No.
I dry them and then I grind them up and brew a tea. Yeah,
What's the ratio of the dried mushrooms?
I'm sorry.
What's the ratio of the dried mushrooms?
Again, if you email me, I will send you a handout that has recipes for what to use.
Has this combination of sort of the mushroom tea, from a viral perspective, versus viral control published, or do you sort of put this together?
There are research publications on using rhubarb, and there are research publications on using the mushroom. I've just combined the two, and I treat prophylactically. A lot of the places that teach, and even the state that publishes a lot of stuff about what to do, even we're using the chemicals, you know, they tell you to test. I do test, but I don't. Some people are fanatic. They won't do anything until they test.
The test in terms of like.
For mite levels, you can, for the population of mites, because again, it's like a geometric or a bell curve. If it gets to a certain point, you're in deep trouble. Some people use an alcohol wash, some people use a powdered sugar wash. I don't like using the alcohol wash because I kill bees. So I use the powdered sugar. Some people use a sticky board underneath their screen bottom board and do a check. I don't worry about checking because I'm treating prophylactically. Anytime I go into the hives, I'm adding the rhubarb leaves. And any chance I get to do the mushroom tea, I'm using it. If I go into the hive every couple of weeks, I'm doing it. And, you know, they grow a lot of rhubarb at the farm, and I have a friend who end up with garbage bags full of leaves on my front porch. I freeze them in Ziploc bags, and then I place them on. Because if you just put them in the refrigerator, they're eventually going to turn to mush. But if you put them in a Ziploc and freeze them, they really stay in effect fresh. And I'll just put them, and they will basically throw every little piece off. when I first started doing it, after reading this one report, I cut them into little strips and put them in. And then I stood there, watched the bees pull the little strips out. And someone said, "Mel, put the whole leaf in and they'll," it's like if you you know anything about beekeeping, if you want to merge two hives, you would put a piece of newspaper between the two and they'll chew through the newspaper and get used to each other and remove the newspaper again, because they're really clean. If you were little kids, I'd say it's like you keep your rooms clean so your folks don't have to do it. And the kids usually go, ha, ha, ha. But
Sorry. So
Yeah.
when you put the leaves down, about how many times a year would you do that? Of course, it takes some time for them to be through it. It's a nice thin layer with air in between, right?
no, I just lay it on top of the frames and then I close the box up.
But not like multiple leaves, just the.
No, just one leaf, but
Oh,
they're
just-
big and they'll cover the whole box. I mean, rhubarb leaves can be really big.
And that's something you would do. at
Anytime I
most,
go into the hive, I do it.
just leave one leaf.
So if I go in every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, I put a leaf on. Again, that's why I'm saying I'm doing it prophylactically. I will test my hives probably twice a year during the season for mites.
I was just
Um,
wondering more so, is it a lot of work for them? to
No,
continue? Like,
no.
not overworking
No, it's when I'm doing an inspection or if I'm looking to check something. The wari hives, I don't do it. I only do the mushroom tea because I'm not opening the wari hives. I look through the windows. The only time I take a wari hive apart, the one that I showed you with the windows, is if I notice a problem through the windows. Otherwise, I don't do it. I tend to see, or I tend to feel that when the bees build their own comb from scratch, they don't tend to have as much of a problem with the mites because they're building smaller cells than a lot of the commercial stuff is. And anybody who does beekeeping now knows that the manufacturers who used to make the sheets of beeswax that were imprinted with the hexagon shape, they made larger cell. They've now gotten smart because they've seen all this research on small cell, and now they're making small cell what they call foundation. I don't use foundation anymore. I've been slowly converting even my Langstroth hives to natural cell, and I've been letting the bees build it out themselves. It's healthy. From my viewpoint, it's healthy. Okay, so here's, I'm gonna run through costs. And again, the handout that I'll send you will have all of these sheets, so you don't have to worry about quickly writing down if you're really interested. The prices are based on 2022 prices from a company called Better Bee in upstate New York, which I find is one of the better suppliers around of beekeeping equipment. There are some local suppliers around the state, though a lot of them will buy their stuff from these different places. Their shipping costs aren't that great. If you're out all the way out in Western Mass, it's not that far from the New York state line. And a lot of times when the state beekeeping groups do conferences, they will come and set up tables and you can order stuff ahead of time and they won't charge you the shipping costs. I don't include labor costs. One, because it's too difficult to know what people are paying. But to do 1 to 5 hives really is just one person, not full-time, you know, couple of hours a week in the beginning and then a couple of hours every couple of weeks. So this, I know this runs through all of the stuff, okay? From the beekeeping equipment itself to a package of bees. There are 2 different ways or 3 different ways to start a beehive. One is you could buy a packet, a 3-pound package of bees. Looks like a shoebox, 4 sides of wood, the 2 bigger sides are screen, a separate queen and a little cage. 3 pounds of bees, 10,000 bees, okay, that you dump into your hive. That's the first way. You can buy a nuke, which is a mini, in effect, what I call a mini hive. It's 5 frames instead of 10, that someone else has started. They're generally not available in this region until late May, early June, but it's already going. There's already honey, there's already brood, which are the baby bees, and there's a queen that's laying and a lot of bees. You just transfer that to your regular hive. So it gives you a head start. The third way is catching a swarm, which new beekeepers, I wouldn't say you're going to have luck doing that. Some of us are on swarm lists. We get phone calls. A swarm, for those who don't know, is when a hive is doing really well and it's overcrowded. So it's your basic overcrowding issue. So 20 to 30% of the bees and the old queen will leave and go find a new place to live.
Wow.
And they will have created a new queen in the hive. A lot of beekeepers don't like swarming because it breaks their production level. So if they're looking to produce a lot of honey, it almost creates a month break from when they're producing honey because of the biology in the hive, okay? I don't mind swarming. It puts more bees out into the world. I also get phone calls. So it's a free source of bees. So as you can see, if you have to buy bees, when I first started, it was $60 per package, 16, 17 years ago. Now 160.
Wow.
And it keeps going up, like everything else.
Right.
So a swarm is free. You know, someone will call you and say, oh, there are bees on a tree outside my front door. Can you come and get them? Sure.
How do you get them?
You just walk up with a bucket, shake them into the bucket, cover it, and take them away.
Really?
There's a new reality TV show that just goes around collecting bees from houses and trees. and stuff like
Really?
Yeah,
that.
I don't do,
No, I'm not-
when, yeah, no, I'm saying when bees swarm, they go to look for a new place to live. So sometimes they'll go into a tree that's hollow. Sometimes they'll find a hole in a wall at your house.
Yeah.
I don't tend to get swarms from that are in houses because I don't want to have to do the repairs.
Yeah.
And there are guys out there who do it in charge. I think there was an article this summer about someone who went in with like 500 pounds of honey in a hive in the wall. And you can,
Oh my
if you
God.
feel, if you have a swarm, a hive of bees in your wall and you feel the wall, you will feel the heat. Trust me.
Wow.
So, but swarm, you know, so, and when they swarm, they've engorged themselves with honey because they know they need the energy to produce the wax to create new housekeeping. So it's like us at Thanksgiving when we're so stuffed, they can't get their stinger out that often.
Oh, interesting.
So often I'll do it like this and I'll just shake them in a
Wow.
bucket and take them home, you know, take them wherever.
Wow.
So do they have the queen at that point?
The queen is in the middle. Okay, because the old queen goes with them. I got a call last summer, or 2 summers ago, before I moved. I was out at the farm and some guy called me and said he was house sitting in Cambridge, where I used to live. And there was a swarm of bees in the back and he got my name off the list. And I said, oh, where are you? And when he told me, I started to laugh. And he said, why are you laughing? I said, well, they're my neighbors and they're probably my bees. I had a type of observation hive that had a nuke underneath it, and it was really full. And I had said to my wife, I have to split this because they're going to swarm. Well, I didn't get to it, so I showed up at his house and I had to go get my ladder, and I put the ladder up, turned around to him, and said, "You don't have to go inside. I'm just going to shake them in the bucket." And when I turned back, they were gone. They had already, basically, when they swarm, they'll go usually 100 yards from where they left,
Oh.
and they collect. And they'll bunch around the queen, and they send out scout bees that I call the real estate bees, who go looking for a new place. And when they find a new place that they all agree upon, they take off. And I watched them
Oh, wow.
circle up to the sky,
Wow.
collect in their big group, and took off.
That's amazing.
So,
Wow.
but,
Wow.
so this goes through all of the different stuff you really need, and it runs through from 1 hive to 5, 1, 3, and 5.
Do you not insulate your hives?
I'm sorry?
Do you not insulate your hives?
No.
I didn't know-
You get 20 beekeepers in this room and you'll get 40 opinions. Some beekeepers insulate. I did my first year, I wrapped my hives. And I have what they call a screen bottom board. And people said, close your screen for the winter. So I listened, I didn't know anything. I closed my screen, I wrapped it with building paper. I lost my hive. And I lost it from moisture. Cold in the hive will not kill your hive because the bees generate, by the middle of the winter, they generate 90-degree temperatures, which you want because she stops laying late fall and then she'll start laying again. It used to be, we said end of January because they've generated 90-degree temperatures because they ball around her in the hive and generate heat. With climate change, with 65-degree Christmas days, I'm now telling people I think she's laying by the beginning of January. So swarm season has increased here, or it's gotten earlier because the hives have built up. So I don't wrap my hives. I don't close my bottom board because it's moisture that'll kill your bees in the winter. If the vapor has no way to get out, it's going to condense in the hive and rain inside the hive and the rain will kill the hives, okay? So any of the cracks on the and joints on the hive itself boxes, the bees seal with propolis.
Wow.
So I don't worry about, I want an airflow through because they're balled around her and you want that airflow. On the Wari hives, one of the things he does is he has what they call a blanket box on the top. And it's a box with a piece of permeable canvas or duck cloth, I think it's called, that will allow the vapor to get sucked up into wood shavings in the box. What's interesting is now some of the Langstroth manufacturers are making blanket boxes to suck the vapor out so that you don't get moisture buildup in the hive. So, I mean, again, 20 beekeepers, 40, if not more opinions. And not all of us agree with each other. So again, this goes through the equipment, the bees, protective gear, some of the tools and equipment you need, testing kits if you want. Honeybee Healthy is a liquid that is a mixture of different lemongrass and some other types of things like that that help the bees. Harvesting equipment, bottles, feeding supplies, sugar if you're going to use sugar, and labeling if you're going to be making. So the cost for one setup first year is almost 2,000, and for 5 hives it goes up to almost 6,500. Gross income projections, okay. Hives up here will produce, in a good year, they can produce anywhere from 120 to 200 pounds of honey.
Wow.
We used to tell people to keep 60 to 80 pounds in the hive for them to get through the winter. I now tell people to keep 80 to 100. So you're basically pulling somewhere roughly, let's say 100 pounds of honey out of your hives at the end of the year or the season. This analysis is based on using 8-ounce bottles. So 100 pounds is 200 8-ounce bottles of honey. And there are a number of different places to sell it. So this just projects what the gross income is. Okay, so for 100 pounds, you're talking about anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000. If you have a super good year and you get 180 pounds, which the last couple of years, I don't think you're going to get anywhere near that, but just for projection wise, you're talking somewhere between 3,600 for one hive to 18,000 gross, okay? Now, and You can sell your honey at farmers markets, local farm stands, you can sell to restaurants. Some CSAs will include honey, and specialty stores. There used to be a specialty store in Cambridge that when she heard I was a beekeeper and I had Cambridge honey, she said, I'll buy anything you can give me. And she was paying me a ridiculous, she was paying me more than what I sell my for now. You know, and she would double it and get it. Crazy. She's no longer there. She's actually out here in Orange, Mass. And there are other products you can capture from the hive. You know, you capture the wax and make candles. You can capture the propolis and some other things. And you can make lip balm. If you really get into it, you can do lip balm, you can make lotions, you can make candles, you can make ornaments. I have a whole set of these terracotta old cookie molds that with kids at the farm when we were doing indoor programs. They used to pick one and I would pour one of the molds and turn it into an ornament for them. Actually, I have some here that at the fair. So then I looked at what expenses you have year to year. For this purpose, I have assumed you're going to be replacing your bees every year, 100%. That is not truly the case. Again, as I said to you, is at the average in the state last season was 50 to 60% replacement. I was down at 20 to 25%. So I'm not, I'm sorry,
Why is that?
because of the approaches I use, I think. I'm assuming. Also, Drumlin is 225 acres of land. Bees will go as far as 5 miles to find stuff. If it's right in front of them, they're not going anywhere. So I don't think our bees leave or go that much further than the property. So they're not getting affected by some of the spraying that's going on by neighbors. Though we just recently had an incident where one of the neighbors is growing raspberries and has some fruit trees, and they have a landscaper that has been going in and spraying using, no offense to anybody in here, organic products. Well, organic doesn't mean they're not toxic to pollinators. There are certain products that are organic that are very toxic to honeybees and all the other pollinators. And unless people learn, they're going to kill bees and other pollinators. Yeah.
So you said Drumlin is sustainable but not organic farm. Does that mean that they use certain chemicals?
No, they use no chemicals.
Okay.
He uses organic compost. He's not organic because he's never gone for the certification. I don't think, I think he's just doesn't want to go through it.
Is there any kind of spray that would not be dangerous?
There are some, if you go to, I don't know how many people know the Exercise Society, EXERCES. I think it's on my resource list. They have a lot of publications about organic pesticides, insecticides, and they have lists of what's good and what's bad. And it's also how they spray and when they spray. This guy, this neighbor, landscaper, you know, when I called her, and because we got reports that they were fine, I found one of my hives affected, and there were a lot of other dead pollinators around, like butterflies and some natural native bees. Well, he's spraying during the day and he's overspraying. So it's coming into our area and affecting all the pollinators. And she said, but he's organic, he's organic.
Wow.
And I said, that's fine that he's organic. I said, but not all organic products are okay and safe for pollinators. I said, period.
Yeah, that's not good advertising when these are organic and then it kills a bee.
Yeah, well, so these are projections for annual replacement. And again, you will not necessarily have to do bee replacements. I think that just depends on what your area is like and how your management techniques are. I just run the maximums. 10% repair replacement on equipment, feeding or any medicines that you might use, more bottles. So annual expenses. So we're talking anywhere from 600 or 700 to 20, almost 3,000. Okay, and then these go through what your net profit for one hive would be and over the years. Obviously, the first year, you're not going to, if you get honey, you're not going to make a lot. But it's like anything, you got to go a little while. Okay. But you can see as you go through the years, it increases. 3 hives, in effect, with 3 hives, you lose money a little bit. Again, that's assuming you're replacing bees every year, but again, I don't think you will be if you're manage good practices. And 5 hives. And this is another little video.
Are there any food purity or food safety considerations for when you're bottling or bottling?
No, honey has a lot of antibiotic properties. And all I do with some people just bottle their honey straight from the hive. They don't even filter it. So there's still some, there might be some pieces of bees. There might be honeycomb in it. I filter it. I don't heat it. Pasteurizing honey kills all of the good properties of your honey. If you go to the companies and say like Subi honey is a big commercial honey product in most supermarkets. If you ask them why did they pasteurize, they say it increases the shelf life which is BS because honey will last forever as long as it's closed. They have pulled honey out of the pyramids, out of clay pots that were sealed, and it was still perfectly good.
Wow.
Okay. I think they do it because they think it looks better because when you pasteurize it, it's clearer. Doesn't taste anywhere near like raw honey.
No.
And it doesn't have the health properties that raw honey has.
And what about the bottling itself? Sterilization?
I basically sterilize or I wash all my bottles in a dishwasher before I bottle. I mean, normal like canning, anybody who does canning, any of the sterilization processes you use for your bottles, it's the same. But the honey itself, you don't really have to worry. The only thing they warn you about is not giving honey to kids under 1. That's one of these debatable issues, but most people will tell you not to give it to under 1-year-old. Yeah.
If you have 2 to 3 acres of land, how many hives would you get? 1?
Yeah, 1 would be fine, or 2.
Or 2? And you'd spread them out?
I'd spread them out. I wouldn't keep your hives together because if one hive got infected
Yeah.
and it's right near the other one, you're guaranteed to lose the other.
So you don't usually recommend for sharing resources?
No, some bee schools that
Yeah.
people teach recommend it's better to start with 2 because you can compare. It's a lot of money. If you can afford it, that's fine, but I tell people to separate them, put them in 2 different locations on their property.
You have 16 hives in the property.
We have 16 hives at Drumlin Farm.
Are they the same species of bees? Are they different species? Are
They're all
males?
honeybees. I tend to, honeybees is the general character. They have races just like we do.
Mhm.
So there are Russian bees, there are carnelian bees, there are buckfast bees, which were developed by a monk in England. There are hybrids that some people have been developing to be more resistant to the mites. There are Russian bees, though I shouldn't mention that now, but and each of them has some different characteristics about how they operate.
Which kind do you have?
I get a number of different ones. I like trying out different ones. It's like people told me Russian bees were more aggressive. I found the opposite. But
If you're only gonna have one hive, what would you get?
most suppliers in this region have Italian bees.
Italian?
Yeah. They're the calmest, probably the calmest and most prolific of the bees
Oh, okay.
around.
That's funny.
It's harder to get buckfast, though some suppliers are now starting to bring in buckfast. There is a guy out here who develops and raises Russian bees.
About native bees, though, I mean, because you have different regions of the country. We're south of here, Midwest, so they all have native bee species that.
There are 30,000, roughly
Right.
30,000 native bees across the country. Each region has different ones.
Right.
I'm only familiar with the ones.
No, I get that, but
Oh,
so what I'm saying, so are any of yours that you guys work with, are they native bees, if you will, for the area?
no, honeybees are not native.
They're not, no.
Oh, sorry.
No, so I'm trying to figure out how to word that.
We work with some native bees
That's
that
what-
are,
yeah.
that are up here, that are at the, well, that we find on the farm at Drumlin. And we do certain things to encourage them to replicate. We're putting out, in effect, different types of bee houses.
That was my question.
Like we use mason bee houses are usually a block of wood that you drill holes the size of a drinking straw, and you can send away for straws filled with them. Or you take bamboo reeds or some of the plant growth that is hollow and put it into a box and hang it up, and the bees will nest.
Oh, wow.
We teach kids, when I teach kids, I try to convince them to talk their parents into not cleaning up all the fallen dead leaves in the fall, because a lot of the native bees nest in piles of leaves. And if you clean, make your perfectly clean property, they have nowhere to nest.
Yeah.
I also try to talk people out of planting regular grass. I try to convince people to do away with grass, either put in gardens, plant native flowers, or plant some kind of ground cover, like clover. Clover doesn't take anywhere near the water that grass takes. You don't need to fertilize it. It reproduces every year.
Wow.
You don't need to mow it, and it provides a really good food source for honeybees and native bees. Dandelions are the biggest example. People try to pull the dandelions because they say it's a weed. It's the first flower that usually blooms in the spring in New England. Great food source for the bees and the
Yeah.
native bees, and the greens are a food source.
Yeah.
So anything to get people to stop doing grass, especially after this summer when there is no grass, it's all
Yeah.
burned up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about, do we have information in terms of beehive density per acre? So how many beehives per acre? As you said, bees can travel almost 5 miles.
Correct.
I've seen some people they talk of 2, some people 3. They can go from the hive and come back.
I
But
will,
wanted to-
I'll include a chart
Yeah.
for you in the package that lists suggestions for, based on your acreage, how many hives you can do up to. I mean, there's a point where you oversaturate, but, or undersaturate. I don't think you can ever undersaturate.
There's a big debate about the actual box. You know, some people say, oh, that's, you know, man-made, you should do something more natural. So what do you say about that?
Again, at the farm, we do a number of different types of bees, of hives, some that replicate more natural approaches, like the Wari hive kind of replicates what bees do in the wild, where they build in a tree and they build down.
How do you spell that,
W-A-R-R-E. If you Google Wari hive, you'll get to a web page that has a free download of a book called Beekeeping for All, which this guy, Abbey Ware, wrote. And it talks about his whole approach and why he thinks it's healthier. And there are even plans online to build your own. I do hives at 2 schools in the Boston area, and the kids at one of the schools built the hives themselves. They had a shop that I wish I had.
What is your favorite?
Yeah.
I love the Wari hives, but I also love them. One, it's more natural, but I love it because it's a great teaching tool because the kids can open the windows and look inside and see what's going on.
But for actual, like if you were to do like more of the honey production.
If you're into, it doesn't produce as much honey. It does produce honey, but not as much because the boxes are smaller. You know, Langstroth hives, the traditional hive, you can produce a lot of honey. Some people, the traditional Langstroth hive is 10 frames. They're now making them that are 8 frames that are a little smaller because it's easier. A 10 frame box full of honey, trust me, is heavy. So
I had 8 ones in there.
even an 8 frame is heavy. Some of us are now experimenting with 5-frame nukes and overwintering our hives in combinations of 5-frame nukes. I mean, there's a lot of different techniques that people are trying. Yeah.
Question. If you saturated with plot of land with pollinated plants, would it discourage your bees from going greater distances to find?
Well, the more stuff that's close by, the better. Bees don't, it's not like one group of bees goes flying off to look for stuff. If it's right in front of them, that's where they're going first. And they clean out. You know, it's not like one group of bees goes to sunflowers, one goes to tomato, or not tomatoes, raspberries. All right, when the raspberries bloom, they all go to the raspberries and they clean that out. Then they move on to the next plant. So if you're planting, even if you're not planting for the bees, you should plant, the way you should plant is basically to ensure that you have different stuff blooming the whole season.
Yeah.
I mean, NOFA has a pollinator network program, which the whole idea is to encourage bees to move and to keep stuff going all season long.
Okay, on one side, I have a neighbor who I know is the spray pesticide, but the neighbors from the other side, go down, I don't know what they're putting in their lawns or their on their property. And if I can encourage the bees to stay on my property and not migrate or wander over to the straight saying poisons, if I have saturated pollinator plants, would that discourage them from going over to the
Well,
poison?
am I going to guarantee you that it's going to stop them from going there? No.
No,
But it does help the more that's near you. It's like, again, that's why I have it really in for big commercial farms that do what I call clear cut farming, because they clear everything out. And once that plant that they've planted is pollinated, there's nothing else. Where in the old days and smaller scale farms, plant a wide variety of stuff, so there's stuff all season. That's why I'm convinced, I don't think the bees from Drumlin go that far, because there's so much stuff right in front of their nose. When I lived in Cambridge, we had a peach tree and raspberry bushes. My early summer honey, even though I still call it wildflower honey, because I don't know where they go, you could taste the hint of peach and the hint of raspberry. So, yeah.
Go back to the weird hive. You said that when you often go put frames, they just let them build that out.
Yeah, I just put the Wari hive has just a bar. If you read Abby Ware's book, he talks about a flat bar. In Massachusetts, that there aren't many laws that MDAR has on beekeepers. There are some laws they'd like to put into effect that they haven't been able to get through. The one rule that is there is that if they come out for an inspection, they have to be able to remove that frame to inspect. If you just had a flat bar like Abby Ware did, the bees would attach the comb to the sides of the walls and it would be very difficult to get out. So we modified the bars. So now it's a bar that has a triangle shape on it. And then there are two pieces that come down maybe 2 inches, which pushes the bees to build like this versus attaching to the walls. So if I need to pull a frame, I can pull it out without a lot of trouble.
So that was gonna be my question, like, do they just keep tacking that in and tacking it in the storm, or do you actually keep taking them out so they don't?
The difference between a Wari hive and a Langstroth hive is Langstroth hives, you add your boxes from the top, okay? Every time you open that hive to add a box or to remove a box, you break the heat sink in that hive. Now, this time of year, it's not really an issue because it's so hot, but early in the season, every time you open up that hive, that 90-degree temperature that they've created dissipates. And they have to work extremely hard to bring that temperature back up. The Wari hive, because you're replicating what bees do in a hollow tree, where they build from the top down, when you add a box, you add it from the bottom. So I'm never opening that hive. I lift it up and shove the box in from below. So that heat sink is never broken. And they still create their bee space.
That sounds heavy though, lift that up. Quite heavy.
Well, when it's 2 boxes, it's not bad. When it's more than that, I have a hand cranked mechanical lift that lifts my boxes. Or you have some friends.
I didn't see an answer, so I'm curious.
I luckily have not had a bear problem. We're in Lincoln, Mass. Concord had bears last summer. Last spring, we had a bear sighting that there was a crew out there filling in some of the ruts in the roads out to the farm area. And they happened to turn into what I call the skinny field at 7 in the morning. And I think Mama Bear was just approaching my hives and she ran off. And luckily she hasn't come back. If they were to appear, I have a problem. I mean, that's the one disadvantage of having your hive spread out. I could put solar powered electric fences around each hive. It's expensive. And the only thing I say to people about electric fences is they're not a panacea. You need to wrap the top of the fence with bacon, raw bacon, because if you don't, that bear is just gonna walk right through it, because it's not like it's an electrocution shock. They don't feel it. But if you wrap it with bacon, they bite it and then they run away because they get a shock in their mouth. But if we get bears, I'm in trouble. I have friends in New Hampshire who they got hit so many times that they created a system where they took wooden pallets and a pulley system, They put their hives on the pallet and they raise their hives, hanging them in the air, and they stabilize them with cables, so the bears can't get to
I thought you were gonna, because I know some people that this sounds horrible, but people lots of things. They created these mail boards, where these things was really horrible for bears to walk around.
them. Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
But I'm saying, this is what it's like. I told
Oh,
you,
no,
it
yeah.
sounds horrible,
Yeah.
but, Like they have that big of a problem.
But, and the bears are moving closer and closer into the urban area.
But even if you did have multiple hives, like a bear, like they won't really attack. I mean, they'll try to attack the bear, but bears.
Oh, the bees aren't gonna hurt, the bees aren't gonna hurt the bees, the bears.
Yeah, even if you did have them all together, right? I guess you said that was.
No, but if you have multiple hives together and you put an electric fence around, it's more protected.
Oh, I see,
That's all,
I see.
that's what,
Okay.
no, the bees won't hurt, the bees aren't, the bears aren't gonna care about the bees. The lambs, the sheep, they have two very, excuse the French, two very horny rams, okay? And they raise their own baby goats. And after a certain period of time, the rams get moved out away from the females because they continue to try. And so they get put out into the field near some of my hives. They don't go after the bees. No, the bees won't bother the bears, but the bears will rip your hives apart.
So to that point, it's not so one of the, or that's what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I strap my hives.
So one of the beekeepers that I talked to, for a different restaurant, he said, you realize that a mountainous area, that have a lot of bears, he keeps those on all year round. And he's had a couple of bear attacks, but even though they knock them over, those straps really. Oh, really?
Yeah, well, they hold the hives together. I strap my hives not for bears, for teenagers. We've had a problem. The farm is wide open. And especially with COVID, the kids weren't allowed out. I mean, partially don't blame them, but when they were finally let out, they're out in the fields at night drinking. I mean, we were all teens. We all drank beers on the sly. At least I think we did. They're out there because we find the beer bottles and they think it's funny to knock the hives out. So this past season, I lost 6 hives to what I call vandalism. And someone said to me, no, Mel, it wasn't the kids. Don't blame the kids. It was the wind. And I said, I would agree with you. It was the wind, but all my hives are banded. And the wind doesn't take apart the straps. They think it's funny. Or in the winter, the winter cold months, they take and they knock the top off. And I lose my bees. And now I have trail cams out to catch them. I mean, because 2 summers ago, there's a camping area on what they call the Drumlin, and they were out there in the middle of the night, and there's a campfire site, and they started a fire. And the wind came up, and it started to spread. Luckily, one of the neighbors saw it, and called the fire department, and they put it out. But there's no way for them to close off that property. It's too big.
So do you have honey here for sale?
I will at the fair.
I need some.
I do have some.
Okay.
So, again, these are all in the handout that I'll send you. We still have time? Or-
You're about 15 minutes over.
Well, I won't kill this. There'll be a resource list. Every county in Massachusetts has a bee club. Most bee clubs run a bee school where during the winter months, X number of nights, over a number of weeks, they'll run a school where they'll teach you how to keep bees. We run one at Drumlin. Unfortunately, because of COVID, most of the bee schools are virtual. This past year, luckily, we finally I got to do 2 field classes. But you can learn how to keep. This is a poster put out by Paul Stamets about the bees. He got into this because he was in his backyard, saw bees all over the fungus and the mushrooms that had water in it and drinking it up. And he hooked up with this entomologist at Washington State and started studying it. He is supposedly coming out with a product this fall based on this research. Again, I've been doing it. It's my little comedy routine if we die, we're taking you with us. And this is Whole Foods. I know a lot of people don't like Whole Foods, but this is their produce department with the pollinators. This is it without. So this is pretty drastic. Oh, I do have the slide. So this is in China. And this is the guy out there with his little brush pollinating the apple blossoms, which, and whoops. Whoops. And this is, if our pollinators disappear, that this is what's going to happen. This happens to be at Halloween, they do this big thing out at the farm in the fields, but I thought it was an appropriate slide.
Yeah.
And this just talks about things we could do for our pollinators, which I kind of mentioned. And there are a bunch of resources I list that'll be in your packets. And this was one of the counselors at the camp that they run. She did this little sketch, so I now use it as a link.
Do you have a website?
No, I don't have a website.
Well, we might need that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, my email is mailbeekeeper24@gmail, and my phone number, and you can feel free to text me or email me, and I usually get back to you within a day. And I'm glad to send you stuff and references and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.